Number 1. The Board. When I was in high school, I was really interested in the occult. My parents were really against that sort of thing. They weren't really that religious, but they didn't like the idea of me messing around with the spirit world. I think they seriously thought that if I were using a Ouija board or something like that the house would automatically become haunted or something. Beyond that, not many of my friends at school were really interested in that sort of thing either. So my interest was pretty limited to me, reading about things in books, or watching late-night TV shows about the paranormal. That is when I met Craig. He was a new student in one of my classes. He had just moved into our town, and really didn't know anyone. He was a typical dark kind of guy. He was pale, always wore black, and had his black hair slicked back. And when he came to school, he generally had these large purple bags under his eyes. But what caught my interest one day was I noticed he was reading a book about contacting the dead. I introduced myself to Craig, let him know I had the same interests as him, and we became fast friends. I have to admit that although I liked Craig, there was something about him that always made me uncomfortable. He would sometimes fall really silent, and I would feel nearly an obligation to pick up the conversation to keep his interest. It's almost like I had a fear that he would get mad at me if I didn't keep him entertained. I never felt good about bringing Craig back around my house. I knew my parents wouldn't like him. He wouldn't be too shy talking loudly in front of them about our mutual interest in the supernatural. But when he told me he had a spirit board, and he thought he and I should use it, I was excited. I checked with my parents, found out I could spend the night at his house, and we were all set. I was a bit surprised when I got to Craig's house. His parents were gone for the weekend, and he was left there to watch over his younger brother. His brother was like 13, and strangely, Craig gave him a porno tape to watch so he'd leave us alone. Craig's room was the basement, and it was a bit weirder than I would have expected even from him. I would have expected everything to be draped in black, with black lights and glowing stuff on the walls. Well, it was dark, but he didn't have glowing things on the walls. He had knives and swords hanging up all over the walls. Knives, swords, throwing stars, and things like that. Many, many real weapons. It was weird. Craig got out his board, and it looked homemade, but it was beautiful. It was wooden, with the letters and words carved neatly into it. The planchette was also wooden. He had candles around the board, and turned the light out. Immediately upon going down there, Craig began acting really weird. Even for him. He seemed like a different person. He had me sit on the carpet floor on one side of the board. He then had me grab his hands, and he went into some weird incantation, speaking a language I wasn't familiar with. He then put my hand on the planchette. He then began asking if certain entities were in the room with us. He had all these weird names, but I really didn't understand any of them, so I can't share them with you. And when he asked over and over again, nothing would happen. He seemed to be getting very annoyed the more that nothing happened as well. He then looked at me, and the creepiest smile came across his face. His eyes narrowed, and he said to me, "Let's conjure the devil." Well, I believe in ghosts and stuff, but I didn't believe in the devil and still don't. However, the look on his face really creeped me out, so I was going to refuse. But then, and this happened pretty quickly, Craig grasped my hands, pulled them off of the planchette. He reached under his bed and pulled out some evil-looking knife. I tried to pull away, but he was holding onto my wrist tightly. He then called out, "I brought him! I brought your sacrifice like I promised." Craig took the knife, cut my arm open as I began to scream. I thought he was going to kill me. He then pulled me closer to him, and he licked the blood right from my wound on my arm. It was on his lips and dripping down his chin. Then he let me go and he fell over, laughing. "I can't believe you fell for that," he laughed. "I don't believe in the devil." He was laughing like he had just told the funniest joke of all time. I was shocked, in pain, embarrassed, and scared. My friend had just cut my arm open and drank some of my blood, in an attempt to conjure up a demon that neither of us believed in. I got up to leave, and he just kept laughing. He didn't even come after me. I went to the hospital. My parents called the police and had Craig arrested for assault. I never saw him again, thank God. I hope he's locked up in a hospital somewhere. Number 2. In the Corner. When I was younger, my cousin Jack used to come visit us every summer for a couple of months. He lived out in the country, and both of his parents would always work all summer. My family lived in the city, so he would spend his time with us. It gave him time to go to museums and experience a lot of things that he wouldn't be able to in the area that he lived in. Now, I have to state right away that I am very religious. The reason for me saying this will eventually become abundantly clear. However, I do not view this as any sort of spiritual event. In my mind, it was completely psychological. When Jack and I were 13, he was once again with us in the summer. He slept in my room because I had twin beds in there. He had been with us for only 1 week, when I woke up in the middle of the night. I looked over at Jack and noticed that he was sitting in the corner. Well, he was kneeling in the corner. He was on his knees, with his nose pressed into the corner. And he was talking to himself, or at least he thought that he was talking to someone else. I tried talking to him, but he really didn't answer. I laid down and closed my eyes, and eventually went back to sleep. This went on sporadically. In addition to that, he would get up at night and leave the room. Once I went out into the living room and found him sitting on the couch, staring blankly into the dark. I tried talking to him, but there was absolutely zero indication that he heard me. This time, even more disturbed, I went to bed. I didn't mention this to my parents at all, because I didn't want to worry them. I decided to bring it up to Jack one day, and immediately, he looked upset and worried. He didn't want to talk about it too much, but eventually I coaxed it out of him. He told me he was speaking to a demon that lived in his head. He thought when he came to visit us this time that the demon would not have come with him, but it did. He told me he spoke to the demon in the corner, so his words would bounce off the wall and then come back into his brain, where the demon lived. He told me it was the only way that he could communicate with the demon. Again, this time I didn't tell my parents about what happened for 2 reasons. First, I sort of thought Jack was just trying to scare me. Second, how do you tell your parents that your cousin thinks a demon is living in his head? Well, looking back, I do regret not going to my parents right away. A couple days after Jack told me about the demon in his head, I woke up in the middle of the night. Once again, he wasn't in the room. I was concerned about him, so I got up and went to the living room. He wasn't there. Not only that, but he wasn't even in the house. The front door of the house was not only unlocked, it was open. I went and immediately woke up my parents and told them everything that had happened. While my parents called the police, I went into the bathroom. I was shocked when I saw all sorts of weird, unintelligible words written in permanent marker on the mirror. There were also some drawings of some weird creature, and the only words I could make out were, "Get out, get out, get out." The police found my cousin Jack. He was standing on a bridge over the river. He was swaying back and forth, like he was considering falling in. They picked him up and brought him to the hospital. My parents went there. For years, they would not tell me what happened at the hospital. Eventually, though, they did. Apparently, Jack was having fits, arguing with this demon in his head, trying to get it to stop talking to him and leave him alone. He kept begging the doctors to let him sit in a corner, because the demon couldn't hear him unless the words bounced off the wall. Jack spent several months in the hospital, and he was put on an atypical antipsychotic medication. Gradually, the demon stopped talking to him, and after about 2 weeks of being on the medication, it stopped altogether. You see, Jack was schizophrenic. He actually believed he was possessed, but he wasn't. And I think it's important that people know this, because people still employ exorcists nowadays when they believe someone is possessed. I'm not an expert, and I can't tell you for sure that possession isn't real. I just think if someone acts like this, it's more important to get them medical help first. If that doesn't work, then try an exorcist. Number 3. Conduct disorder. Warning. Though this story doesn't depict violence, it makes mention of past violence to animals. If this will disturb you, please do not watch this story. I got into an argument once with a friend about a movie we watched. I'm not going to give his name or even make up a false name for him. I'll just refer to him as my friend. I don't remember what it was called, but it involved a medical student who was completely normal, eventually becoming a complete psychopath. We were both 14 at the time, but I had already decided I wanted to become a psychologist. So I was familiar with the actual diagnosis for psychopathy. It's antisocial personality disorder. One thing most people don't know is that someone cannot just become a psychopath overnight. They have to have developed the personality disorder over time, including showing signs of conduct disorder before turning 18. If you've ever watched a movie about a serial killer and they show you their sick behavior as children, that will give you a general idea, if not a scientific one, about what conduct disorder entails. My friend and I got into an argument over this. He was adamant that anyone could become a psychopath at any point in their life, even if they were raised and lived a completely normal life. I let him know that is just not the case. They had to show signs of conduct disorder, which includes things such as violence or aggression to people or animals, a disregard for rules, destruction of property, things like that. And I let him know this isn't just something that can develop overnight. It's due to maladaptive development. If the maladaptive development isn't there, someone just can't go out and do these things and become a psychopath. Well, my friend didn't agree with me. He also felt that if someone began hurting animals, hurting people and such, even if it was difficult for them to do in the beginning, they would eventually get used to it and become numb to those sort of things. I let him know that it just didn't work that way. Even serial killers don't become numb to killing people. After going back and forth, we realized that we weren't going to convince each other, so we moved on. I pretty much thought we'd never talk about it again. About a year afterwards, my friend began acting very different. He became very depressed and very agitated. He became morose and weird. In school, he He would walk down the hallways with his head looking down. He stopped doing well in class. When any of his friends tried to hang out with him, he turned us down. I began calling his parents, and they appeared to be pretty annoyed with him. He never listened to them. He broke rules and argued a lot. I was calling them to ask what was wrong with him, but they were hoping I would know. I didn't, and he wouldn't tell me anything. Eventually, he quit coming to school. A few days later, I asked his parents what happened, and I found out that my friend had been put into a psychiatric hospital. They were reluctant to tell me why, but eventually gave me a very gruesome explanation. He had not come home in a few days, and they had to go looking for him. They found him inside an old, abandoned shed. Even worse, they found numerous bodies of dead and decapitated animals in the shed. My friend confessed to killing them. I visited my friend in the hospital. It was then that he told me something I will never forget. Yeah, I'm sure you think you know where this is going. My friend developed conduct disorder right under my nose. Well, you'd be wrong. He didn't have conduct disorder. However, he became obsessed with proving me wrong. He wanted to prove that if he had killed animals all the time, he would eventually become numb to doing it. So he killed them. And the more he killed them, the more he did not become used to it. In fact, the guilt and disgust began killing him inside. He stopped doing it when he realized he would never get used to it. But it kept eating him up and threw him into a dark depression. Eventually, he became disconnected from everyone. It took him a long time to get over it. A really long time. And he eventually got better. But to this day, he is haunted by his actions when he was younger. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the button below, or wait for the button of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. Just please know, the one requirement I have is that the story is original and has not appeared on any other channel. In the meantime, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.